Hello, everyone. I welcome you all to another session of the Malgudi Group. As time progresses, the members of this group increase, and that is heartening. I welcome Dr. Bidyut Bhushan Jaina, who teaches at Christ University, Bangalore, and Arunav Chakravarti, who is a research scholar at Tezpur University. And today we have come together to continue our discussion on Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry. In the beginning, I would like to talk about his collection of poems titled A Rain of Rites. I would like to begin with a poem, actually the titular poem, A Rain of Rites. Sometimes a rain comes slowly across the sky that turns upon its grey cloud, breaking away into light before it reaches its objective. The rain I have known and traded all this life is thrown like kelp on the beach, like some shape of conscience I cannot look at, a malignant purpose in a nun's eye. Who was the last man on earth to whom the cold cloud brought the blood to his face? Numbly, I climbed to the mountain tops of hours, where my own soul quivers on the edge of answers. Which still, stale air sits on an angel's wings? What holds my rain so it's hard to overcome? That's the poem titled A Rain of Rites. And I am intrigued by this connection between the words rain and rites. Just as rain is continuous, when it is raining, it is continuous, and no one can stop the rain. No one can create some kind of obstacle in the flow of rain. In the same way, I find that rites, the rites which define different stages of our living from birth to death, the rites are also something which cannot be escaped, something which cannot be transcended. Even if one wants to, one gets pulled into the omnipresence of rites. And I think there is also something in the way the last line of the poem talks about rain. What holds my rain so it's hard to overcome? What makes rain something that the poet desires to overcome but finds it hard to do so? Let us begin with this thought, Vidyut. I would like to hear your response to this.
Um, see, I was also reading the poem, the same poem, and it's an important theme in world poetry. In poetry, why world poetry? In poetry, the Reign of Rites. I am reminded of Octavio Paz, another poet, Mexican, and Nobel laureate who, to his last day, was in love with India, and he has translated from Sanskrit also, Sanskrit poetry. So Octavio Paz also has a poem called "As One Listens to the Rain." Okay, and uh, We also encounter rain, T.S. Eliot, and other poets. Um, it's regeneration and memories, it resurrects memories. Uh, but there are certain things about this poem, certain aspects to this poem, which is very interesting. Uh, the poem begins as though it's a continuation of another poem, uh, very much like Jayanta Mahapatra's Dhauli. We in Odia we call it Dhauli, and it begins as though and one day like that, not exactly and like and one day, but uh, it appears as though it's just a continuation of a poem that uh, preceded it. Okay. I think poetry is like that. Um, every single poem is just another chapter, maybe another page, maybe another stanza uh, in the poetry which never dies. That is very much like this. There is a Hollywood film called Music That Never Dies. Okay. One important thing that important aspect of Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, I see how he articulates silences. I think in the last time also we discussed this, that how silences are more articulate in his poetry, and I think uh, there are some poets in whom uh, silences cement the words. Actually, you don't find that in every single poet. There are poets who only mean one and one thing, and there is no other, you know, interpretation that you would find. Uh, for example, Rupi Kaur. Okay, so there are. So what is it that is there in poetry which tries to, you remove a full stop and an entire corridor of meanings opens up, that kind of a thing. What does rain do, by the way? And and in this poem also, I personally feel that in all great poetry, happiness is either a memory or a desire. That I feel. Just imagine one fine evening, one is sitting alone with a cup of chai, and suddenly it rains, or the sky is overcast, and that acts as a pointer to something else that had happened maybe years ago. Maybe you just stretch your fingers across the evening of 35 years, 40 years, 60 years to touch the rain. I'm reminded of here because we study poetry, we read poetry literature in an intertextual context, right? I think I think all of us would remember to the lighthouse, Virginia Woolf's, when Mrs. Ramsay is standing on the veranda of the house and stretching the hand into the rain, and the raindrops touch the fingertips, and how Virginia Woolf, being Virginia Woolf, in a subordinate clause of a sentence, talks about the death of Mr. Ramsay. That these raindrops touching her fingertips reminded her that Mr. Ramsay passed away last night. Okay. Uh, Maybe rain does that. So this line, sometimes rain comes slowly across the sky that turns upon its grey cloud, breaking away into light before it reaches its objective. The rain I have known and traded all this life is thrown like kelp on the beach. Now see, it rain also is a habit. We rehearse rains throughout our life, and we get used to. Sometimes, in some kind of a nondescript corner of a rather indifferent city, when you are sitting alone and it rains, you are reminded of the rain of your village or a small town. Okay, so I think the play of memory that you see in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, uh, uh, it's an important aspect of his poem. And always a poem is a pointer. If I say look at the moon, one need not look at my finger. It's a pointer to something. And at a time when, just imagine one day all the great structures of the world go missing, and you, while excavating, you just have a splinter in your hand, and suddenly you realize, oh, this could be from some structure, maybe Kailasha temple, or maybe from pyramids, or maybe this or that. And the question arises is that we are trying to imagine so much on the basis of very little. And that is what I think great poetry does. It uh, sets you on a path to an unnameable elsewhere, maybe. Okay. And Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, in that sense, would be a universal language, which so his rain reminds us of our rains that we have encountered, that we have been rehearsing. And maybe one fine evening after, I mean, so many years hence, it would rain and we won't be there. Very much like that telling poem of W.H. Auden, in the memory of W.B. Yeats. You died, but nothing seems to have changed. There is still sunlight, the fox is running through the forest, and still things go on. Uh, and also, uh, I think last time I was alluding to the Odia poet Ramakant Rath, and he says that poets are a strange species. They dream of a sky, and their entire life they strive to find a ground for it. And when uh, when one doesn't have anyone to have a conversation with, why not externalize yourself and fall into the silences of the seemingly different being that you are? So I think rain does that to us. It regenerates memories. It brings back, uh, you know, ideas, thoughts, and maybe it brings every single half tone and the would have beens, could have beens, and might have beens, and disturbs the available. Okay. And that is what Rain does actually. So in this particular poem, you see this poet taking wings at a certain level. Um, these last lines, two lines, end with interrogative marks, which still stale air sits on an angel's wings. What holds my reign? So it's hard to overcome. Okay. It's very difficult to come up with a categorical meaning for poetry, and but it could mean that, maybe. But anyway, as we go along, maybe we would share our ideas more and more. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Vidyut. Actually, when you were talking about, you know, this poem being a continuation of something else, and we don't know what that something else is, but we can sense that this is a continuation because of, the word sometimes a rain comes slowly across the sky. And you were also talking about rain being associated with memories. So I feel that perhaps these two lines of thought could be linked to myth, because myth is also memory, not individual memory, but a kind of collective memory. And myth is also something from which creativity arises, which is why it seems as if, it comes from something else. It does not start there, it has its roots somewhere else. Because if we talk of myth, I'm reminded of that story of Rishyashringa, and how the king of that land, he sent courtesans to seduce the sage, because it was believed that till the person is celibate, he cannot perform the rites which would bring rain to their place, because the place was suffering from a long drought. And that is why, in spite of his father's warning, his father was also a sage, in spite of his father's warning, he followed the courtesans who deceived him into thinking that they were also sage-like. And then, he was taken to the kingdom of, to the court of this king on a ship which was made specifically for his purpose. There was also a hermitage built on that ship. And then he was taken to the king's court, and even the king's adopted daughter was given in marriage, or was promised in marriage to Rishyashringa. And being overwhelmed, he could perform those rites which finally brought rain into the land. So this association of rain with something else, probably, sexual union, or probably marriage, both of which are rites in a sense. So, I am interested to explore more this connection between rain and rites, because, as you said, sometimes we are not responsive to rain. It is just happening, and we are thinking of so many other things. So rain is a habit. That's what you said. Rain becomes a habit. We do not respond to it. In the same way, we perform rites. We are absorbed into rites, but we do not respond to rites, just as we would respond to something we are really interested in. So rites are also a matter of habit, just as rain is sometimes. So these were the thoughts which came to my mind while you were speaking of, memories and habits being, embedded in the texture of this particular poem. But meanwhile, another member of our group has joined, and I must introduce him to the audience. We have Dr. Manu Mangat with us here, who is a poet above everything else. He is a professor of English, but he likes to be called a poet above everything else. He is the author of Mute Melodies. So Manu sir, if you are here, we are talking about A Rain of Rites, the collection of poems by Jayanta Mahapatra, and we are trying to understand what these two words are doing together in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. So if you would like to come in here and share something, anything regarding your experience of reading the poet, then you're welcome to do so. Yes, Manu sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Really sorry. Right now, I'm outside. I will be home in like 10 minutes and I will be speaking. I hope there are people speaking. So please go on. I will, get back in 10 minutes. I'm listening, but I cannot properly speak because people are
Okay, got
looking
it,
at me
got
and
it.
they are thinking
Fine,
something is
fine, fine.
terribly
So we
wrong
will
with me.
wait for 10 minutes and then you will be able to speak. Fine. Yes, so I was talking about this connection between rain and rites, which is where I'm also interested to look at the image of kelp in that stanza. The rain I have known and traded all this life. It's interesting that the word trade is used with rain. The rain I have known and traded all this life is thrown like kelp on the beach. So kelp is some seaweed that is, regularly thrown on the beach. So what could kelp symbolize here? No, I think it could mean something, which happens regularly. As you said, it happens out of habit, because always, when waves they touch the beach, they leave kelp on the shore. But why this word traded? And also kelp, it is used for commercial purposes. So there is a connection with trading in the image of kelp as well, because kelp is used for manufacturing purposes and also for different kinds of food and also medicines, I believe. So I'm just intrigued to know about this image that the poet has used here. Yes, Vidya.
Um, it's really interesting that you would say it could be interpreted. That is actually the language of poetry. I mean, not the categorical language that we use, the language of exactitude, which is a mathematical language. So, so in poetry, emotion would have a logic, a different kind of logic altogether. When I say that, I saw 1,000 stars on the surface of the lake, one doesn't go down and count. Uh, so that way, uh, the uh, there are two ways of looking at it. One is the Wordsworthian way, when we say that it's memory, which is recollected. That is one way of looking at it. That maybe he's talking about the rain that he has traded. Traded means, let's use a very trade and commerce language, to exchange the rains. Okay, that's a very rudimentary way of looking at it. It could be. I'm also not giving an exactitude because I do not really know what the poet means. We would never know, as in one of the poems, the bus, I think Arun Kolatkar's poem. How hard you may try, you may not, you would never ever be able to step inside somebody's head. Okay, that is one way of looking at it. We can just make wild guesses. That is one way of looking at it. That yes, I have traded the rain. I have maybe spoken about the rain. Maybe one fine evening some 30 years ago, uh, I had exchanged my memory of rain with you, with that of yours. Okay, or maybe uh, we looked at the sky, you know we saw those almost invisible letters, and it was, the sky was overcast, and we wanted to, we had together interpreted all those letters that were once visible some 30 years ago in the sky. And now that you are gone, you have toppled into oblivion, and all our memories have been consigned to the flames of history. And I am alone here, and the letters again appear in the sky, but I do not know how to interpret it, because last time when I met you, you had interpreted them in a certain way. Now you are not here. How do I interpret those letters that are visible in the sky? That is one way of looking at it. The other year could be a poet actually trades in rain and summers and winters. The language of poetry, if I say that I met Shatarupa, uh, you know, I had met her 30 years ago. That is a language of quotidian existence. But if I use this language, that I remember meeting her wrinkles ago and 30 winters ago, this is not the language of that we commonly use. We rather, if you use this language in public forum, people would think that you have lost it, actually. But the point is, the language that I used earlier, that is the language that can only mean one and the same thing. So that means poetry is intrinsically polyphonic. It has its own language altogether, and how it's quite magical. Some kind of a, that's why I like T.S. Eliot's understanding of poetry in tradition and individual talent. He actually is highly critical of William Wordsworth in tradition and individual talent. He doesn't quite buy the argument of something recollected in tranquility. What he says, it's a sulfuric reaction that happens when two words come together, or something happens in the poem which wasn't there before. So that also is a possibility. And we would know as poets that how words come from all different directions and make the body of the poem, we also don't realize after a point. So it is quite magical. So here Plato has a point, but I can be critical. One can be critical of Plato. He says that poets are, uh, you know, is a poets are a different entity. They talk about things that they cannot account for. But can we really account for everything in life? In the sense, when we are running high fever and somebody places our their hand on our forehead, mother places, we feel something. Can we really quantify it? Can we really come up with like E equal to mc square and talk about that in that way? Can we really, to use a very strong language, can we really inflict a discourse on poetry? And that is so here, uh, the rain that I have always known. So is there the same kind of rain that we always encounter? Can we say that it's my rain, or the rain that I knew in a particular village or a particular small town? Small towns are very interesting. We have read the Greek poet Sifi Cavafy. Then how hard you may try, the small town and the memory of it always, you know, follows you like that pug in Vodafone. Wherever you go, people would know you. That small town. Okay, and he wants to, in the two stanzas, the poem by C.P. Cavafy called The City. The first stanza, he wants to go somewhere else because whatever he does in this town is destined to be ruined, as it were, and the town is a witness to all the failures of his life. Okay, but the second stanza is quite prophetic, and he says that you won't find another land, you won't find another sea. Wherever you go, this town will, this city will follow you, because the way you have wasted your life here in these backwaters, you would have wasted it in any part of the world. Okay, so when we say that's my rain, that I know this rain, I know this smell. That when it rains, the earth exhales a certain kind of smell. So there is a personal relationship with rain. I'll give you another example here. Uh, Maxim Gorky's book, My Childhood, is in 3 volumes. The first one I'm talking about. Uh, Father is dead. So the grave diggers are digging up the grave, and it suddenly rains, and the pit is filled with water. And this little Gorky, little child, and is looking at it quite, in a very curious manner. And it suddenly rains, and the pit that had been dug up to by the grave diggers is filled with water, and the small frogs, clogged by stroked by the clod of earth, fall into the pit. And this little kid, Maxim Gorky, is so sad, and he tries to save those frogs, little frogs, out of the pit, unaware of the fact that his father is no more. Okay. Sometimes rain also is a memory. By remembering something, we remember ourselves. Thus, memory is a matrix of our individuality. That's why, in the first phase of my, reflection, I said, in all great poetry, happiness is either a memory or a desire. I'm reminded of this French writer André Gide, who said that nothing obstructs happiness but the memory of happiness. In fact, and the second one, the kelp on the beach is thrown like this. Rain has been as the has as though has the sea has returned it the memory of rain, and it's like a kelp. Also, at a certain level, it is so visual. Okay, the same rain, is it not magical? Really, I think you used that word in literature. That language is used in a magical way. Just imagine the same rain. You don't see anything in it, but I do. The same sky, you see just a dark ribbon. I see a village, long gone, long past. So I think through image, I think it's the best example of an image in poetry, very much like T.S. Eliot says, in Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, how the brown fog was nestling against the window, very much like Ramakant Rath talking about ennui, and that, it is a summer afternoon, and uh, old bull is rubbing its hoof against a broken wooden bridge. So it's almost like the image. So I think where language fails, not language, where words give away, images take over. So images cannot just mean one thing. They mean many things at different points in your life, really. So I see, as a poet, it's quite visual to me. The seaweed, it's another sea, as though, maybe a cosmic archaeological survey of the world has excavated another sea, another beach, another rain. Okay, so that means this rain in this quotidian city of ours acts as a pointer to some other rain. And rain, a rainy afternoon, or so many years ago when I had lost you. I am reminded of another poet, I think, Guru Prasad Mahanti, also here. Anyway, we'll continue. I have spoken a lot.
No, it's good to listen to you because you talk in an interesting way, bringing in other poems and other poets, and making a comparison, because it really opens different strands of thought. I remember, I don't remember exactly where, but you were talking about rain and memory, and the image of the kelp signifying that some kind of memory is thrown back. So I think Jayanta Mahapatra also uses the phrase remembered rain somewhere, remembered rain. So it is interesting the way you said that we cannot have a definitive explanation of a particular image being used. It cannot be done, because that is why poetry exists. Had there been a definitive a version of a particular word or image, then poetry would not exist. And that is why we are able to talk about these things. Otherwise, we would just be content reading a poem, and we would have nothing to say about it. So while you were speaking about it, a thought came to my mind. Just as when the cloud is taken apart, or when the cloud gets fragmented, we have rain, right? The rain falls on earth. In the same way, when we take apart the language, when we take apart the words, when we take apart the images in a poem, then I would say there is that silence. There is that silence which we had started with. Not just one silence, but silences in plural, I would say. And each of us, in our own ways, we negotiate with that silence. We negotiate with that silence. We bring in our thoughts and our feelings, our observations, our perceptions into that silence. And that is a kind of amalgamation that you were talking about, why something new is created, as you were referring to the work of T.S. Eliot tradition and individual talent. So it is a kind of amalgamation happening. And I would say in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, that kind of an amalgamation is intense. It is very intense. And that is why when we read his poetry, we can actually feel an absence. There is something absent in our being, and we have to go in search of that which is absent. And to go in search of that which is absent, we have to turn inwards, not outwards, but we have to go inwards. And how much inwards can we go? That is the
Yeah.
question. And
Yeah.
usually, we see the poet confessing that he has to deal with sleeplessness. He has to deal with, anxieties. He has to deal with a lot of questions, and, incomplete thoughts. And all of those things, they are reflected in the words that he uses.
Just that also, I mean, before Manu sir and Arunav reflect upon Jayanta Mahapatra, just one or two sentences I would like to use. That one is the rain in memory, uh, that we enact. we keep on reenacting and enacting. And you also spoke about emptiness. I'm just reminded of uh, Swedish poet Par Lagerkvist, who in one of his poems writes that what else can fill the heart like emptiness. Okay, you need an empty space for an echo, Sitwe. Okay, and Jayanta Mahapatra, I'll tell you, when I sent him my second poetry collection, uh, which I wrote during my master's MA MPhil times, I wrote that. I was so happy. He had called me, and then he told me about the second poetry collection, and also the first one. Both Bibu Pati and Bibu sir, and I call him Bibu uncle, and also Jayanta Mahapatra. So he had read all the poems, and he spoke about that first poem called The Bicycle in the second poetry collection, which is a letterbox across time. And somehow, and he wrote this 4 5 line message that, Vidyut, this if you keep on writing poems like this. So I told him, sir, I was childish. MA MPhil time, I just wrote something. But I realized what he was trying to say, that he said, Vidyut, he calls it the perceptive poem. The poetry should have all these echoes. It shouldn't just be about, when we read Nightingale, we don't begin reading Nightingale with John Keats. We think about Homer, we think about Aeneid, we think about Ovid. How the Nightingale has been singing throughout the ages and across ages. Okay, now also I think when we read Ahalyas are also in IT sector. Ahalya has also tried to write poetry on uh, a gas stove while trying to soften the edges of chapatis with ghee. Okay, they are also Ahalyas, right? So I'll stop here. Over to either Manu sir and yeah.
Yes, Vidyut, definitely only when there is that hollowness or emptiness can we hear the echoes. Yes, Manu sir, we are waiting to listen to you.
Well, well, um, I don't know whether I'm filled with hollowness or silence, but I guess there is Vidyut Bhushan happening within me. I was listening to him since I joined the session, and though I'm not a scholar in Sanskrit, I guess Vidyut Bhushan would mean something like adorned by the power of electricity, or adorned by an electric current, adorned, glittering, shining by a lightning. So I guess when I was listening to Vidyut, I don't know whether I should address him sir or
No, 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 no,
Vidyut.
no, sir. Call me Vidyut, sir, please. Vidyut is fine.
Yeah. Okay, so Vidyut, I got the uh, feeling of being clothed in lightning, and I guess Vidyut Bhushan Jana, is it only about what clothes Vidyut Bhushan Jana, but it was also about what adorns everyone who listens to him as well. So yeah, it was a baptism by fire kind of experience, listening to such deep and moving account of poetry, and you know embarking on expeditions through multiple poets from multiple poetic traditions and cultures, and I'm sure others would also echo the same sentiment, that it was an electrifying experience. Not electrifying in the way Ravi Shastri would call a cricket match, but electrifying in a poetic sense. And I think it is most becoming of a session, or a group of sessions devoted to none other than Jayanta Mahapatra. So, Shatrupa ma'am introduced me and she said, above all, he wishes to call himself a poet. I think if there is a poet above all, that should be Jayanta Mahapatra. Um, but if I want to say I am a poet below all, then immediately Wordsworth would remind me that a poet is above all. So I guess I don't really know what happened in the previous sessions or what happened before I joined this meeting, though I wish to listen to the YouTube recordings. I couldn't, extremely apologetic for that. And what is transpiring here is slightly alien to me because I'm not sure whether I'm familiar with the sets of poems or poetry collection that you're talking about. I haven't been able to follow those sessions, though I could get the feel of what you are talking about. Um, I think, as far as my experience with Jayanta Mahapatra and rites goes, I guess I have read about rites probably in that poem Dawn at Puri, but a poem that really lingers, has lingered with me throughout my life as a student of literature, has been this poem Hunger. And I'm sure that you have had innumerable discussions already on the poem Hunger, but I cannot, you know I cannot finish what I'm doing without recourse to that particular poem, because I believe that is a poem that has transformed generations, not only of poets but also of poetry readers. And I, it is a Bidyut Bhushan experience reading that poem, Hunger. And that was part of my syllabus when I did my BA English course. And that was part of an Indian writing in English paper. And I had utmost disregard for all Indian English writing, because I thought that paper was there only because I'm an Indian and I'm doomed to study that paper because this is a college or a university in India. But as I entered into the portals of Indian English literature, of course, there were uh, beautiful poems from Toru Dutt and others along the line, including Sarojini Naidu and all the others. But that experience of Indian English poetry was limited to thinking that, okay, there are some people writing poetry in English in India, except two people. And those two were Kamla Das and Jayanta Mahapatra. Kamla Das in entirety, Jayanta Mahapatra because I could study this poem Hunger. And my fledgling imagination, my fledgling brain couldn't understand much about his other poems, definitely not. Even now, no. But this poem Hunger, for a for a teenager, I should say, meant so much. It was part of what I was going through as an individual. It was also part of what I could see around me, and it represented the two kinds of hunger that I could see around. Of course, both physical hungers. And it took me a long while to realize that that word hunger, that title, had much more to it than those couple of meanings that the teacher taught us. And then this hunger started growing with me, not leaving me with the exam as many other poems would do, but it started growing with me to such an extent that when I studied aesthetics, I could immediately relate Indian aesthetic concepts with this particular poem, Hunger. And when I studied the possibilities of suggestion in poetry, when I discussed when my teacher discussed the concept of Vyanjana, I realized how probably these Indian poets, either consciously or unconsciously, were trained in Indian poetic traditions. Jayanta Mahapatra above all, because I think there is much to the poetry of Mahapatra that is suggestive. Suggestive in a very different sense, not the suggestion that I usually encounter, say, in the poetry of Kalidasa or Shakespeare, but an altogether different, refreshing kind of suggestion that is near yet far. That is, that is a strange amalgamation of opposites. That is a reconciliation of paradoxes. That is like Bidyut Bhushan. I think there is that oxymoron. Poetry lives and thrives in that oxymoron. That is why you people were talking about the silence that is left when you take out all the words of poetry. So I think, yeah, silence, uh, the empty spaces between the words, that is one sort of silence that you are talking about. And then the silence that is left when you read people like Mahapatra is yet another poignant, living sort of silence. If silence lives, I think it breathes through the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra without a doubt. And the stubble you find on his beard is very much similar to the stubbles of thought that his poetry leaves in our hearts when we read his poetry. It feels like, when you kiss a man, you kiss your father, or a man with a beard like Jayanta Mahapatra's, you feel that stubble brushing against you. And I think that is the soft yet rough feel that Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry leaves, Leaves, leaves in us as we navigate through his poetry. I don't know whether I should say something or anything about hunger, the poem, because I think that would be totally out of place here. But this is just a sort of remark that I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Manasar, for that beautiful imagery while you were trying to uh, tell the audience about the feel of Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry. And I'm glad that you find Vidyut sir's, you know, words electrifying. He's also a poet, so it's like when two poets meet, then and they meet to talk about poetry, it would definitely have a different kind of resonance. So, you see, your mentioning hunger is not out of place, because in the last session we talked about hunger, and we also did a reading of the poem Hunger. And today we are talking about the collection titled A Rain of Rites. And both Hunger and Dawn at Puri, the poem that you mentioned, they are part of this collection. And at this point, I would like to read the poem Dawn at Puri for our audience, and then we will continue our discussion. Dawn at Puri. Endless crow noises, a skull on the holy sands tilts its empty country towards hunger. White-clad widowed women, past the centers of their lives, are waiting to enter the great temple. Their austere eyes stare like those caught in a net, hanging by the dawn's shining strands of faith. The frail early light catches ruined, leprous shells leaning against one another, a mass of crouched faces without names, and suddenly breaks out of my hide into the smoky blaze of a sullen, solitary pyre that fills my aging mother. Her last wish to be cremated here, twisting uncertainly like light on the shifting sands. So that's the poem Dawn at Puri. Now, yes, Vidyut sir, if you'd like to respond.
I'm really thankful to Manu sir for those words. And I was listening to him, and he spoke really well, really, really. And it was like a crescendo. The last when he spoke about the stubble, and I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was Lorca. I think in one of his poems he writes that regarding this lover's first gray hair. That you are the one who welcomed my first gray hair with a song. you know so see, from poetry silences we are maybe veering towards the semiotics of hair. This is what poetry. And Manu sir, you spoke really well. I was quite intently listening to you. Now while listening to you, I went on Amazon and I saw your book also. I'm going to order Mute Melodies, and I would like to read you. And the most interesting thing is that this poem that you read out, uh, Rilke has this book called Letters to a Young Poet. I mean, apart from his Duna elegies and other poems, he has this Letters to a Young Poet. Rilke was highly, in the first letter itself, Rilke was highly critical of criticism. And in fact, I was watching an American film called Fathers and Daughters, and there is a line there that why on earth did God create um, mm, critics, literary critics, and cockroaches? Maybe God may be having his own reasons. So the point is, now whatever, after you read out Dawn at Puri and look at how this, the first second line itself, how the skull and the crow tilting the other country towards, I'm forgetting the last line, the next line, and hunger something.
Towards hunger, yes.
Yeah. So the point is, look at this language of poetry, by the way. It is very tentative. There is a sense of tentativeness about poetic language. I think this is what happens. I think if you look at poetry and philosophy, and philosophy tries to demystify life. By holding on to a problem doggedly for an answer, philosophy tries to demystify life. Poetry, on the other hand, tries to mystify life, in the sense, this art of saying I like you without saying I like you. And that tentativeness, it's almost like looking at somebody through a frosted window. You know that someone or something is there, but you know not exactly what it is or who it is, really. Okay. I think in poetry, truth appears like that, not like philosophy also. So that's why when I read these poems of Jayanta Mahapatra, not only this, I don't know if Manu sir would have read this. In an Odia, there is an Odia poet, very well-known Odia poet called Guru Prasad Mahanti. And he has a poem called Akhira Kapoto Moram, that means the dove of my eye. And it has been translated into English by Jayanta Mahapatra. And I see the choice of Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry and images, and the kind of poems that he has translated. Okay, as you said, it's not only an amalgamation. It's like you are trying to connect the tissues of different eras together. Okay, and I think poetry is that uh, uh, that now, that now, which brings the not yet and the no longer together. Okay, and that's an experience that we have, when we uh, and I think it was Iris Murdoch, the British philosopher and writer, who said that literature is a sexual art. Now, there is a reason why that word is used. A certain permutation and combination of words can really arouse you. I mean, it may not only be a sexual arousal, any arousal that uses senses as its scaffolding, and is arousal enough. And it's quite magical, right? When we read somebody like uh, uh, Vladimir Nabokov. Look at his book Speak Memory, and he writes, cradle rocks above an abyss, and common sense tells us that our existence is a brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. And look at this. Look at the language. This is not the language of mathematics. It's not the language of philosophy, certainly, because philosophy will ask you, what do you mean by cradle rocks? Okay, so this a sense of cosmic chaos that we see in poetry, you know and you have to be taken through the debris of language at a certain level, maybe, to understand this. So when I read Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry both in Odia and English, I see that, as Manu sir pointed out, that silence which lives and also leaves. So that silence is there. I think it is a celebration of silence. And I think the last time also, I remember using, alluding to Raja Rao, book The Meaning of India. He says that language is nothing but um, it's a compounded silence, some kind of an echo that we have. I think, if Manu sir and you would correct me if I am wrong, I think it was Bhartahari or Bhavavuti. I'm trying. He said that poetry exists when all the words, images, alankar, everything is discarded. What remains is poetry. So that means the idea of rasa. Rasa is not created by bringing words together or figures of speech together. Rather, rasa to articulate itself brings these things together. It's like the whole idea of Spoto and Dhani. I think it was Anandavardhana, who I think Abhinav Gupta, I think, who goes on to say that this rasa is this unique confrontation between the generalized subject and the universalized object of experience. So certain words here and there can lead you to somewhere else. That means, unlike philosophy, which almost promises an object of arrival, poetry only gives you a direction. So poetry doesn't promise you an object of arrival. It can only give you a direction to an unnameable elsewhere, where maybe, that's why poets are called strange creatures, right? They dream of a sky, and their entire life they strive to find a ground for it. That is what we have all done. And also, one thing I would like to correct is that there are not two poets here. I don't know about Arunav. Satarupa also is a poet. There are three poets here. And so that is the thing. Yeah, but one meaning of this poem, no, I don't know. But see, this is how it is, how it's an universal language. When he says in the poem Dhauli, that when the wind, the breeze, almost he doesn't use that word. This is one of my words. I think in my poem I use that, uh, this memory comes sniffing at the paddy fields. This, see, look at the language. When you use this language, it's a universal language. It's not just a language which is soaked um, in the in the climate of Odisha. you know um, I still remember this one poem in my first book, which I was quite lucky enough. Manu sir, K. Sachidanandan launched my first book. So I wrote that book when I was a BA student. There was a poem about grandmother, where I'm talking about how the betel juice is trickling down the corners of her mouth. And uh, uh, K. Sachidanandan was kind enough to, he had read, not only had he read all the entire book, he had marked with, this, what do you call that, post-its. And he read out. He said, and after that, I had a conversation with him in his, guest house, in his hotel room. He was telling me, see, this is called image. How you use a word and suddenly a picture is created. Okay, so I think in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry is quite, replete with, full of those images. I think this is what differentiates poetry from maybe philosophy. This use of image, which T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound and others, even Octavio Paz and others are quite well known about. Yes, known for. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Poetry shows us directions, and I also believe that poetry is about oscillations, just like a pendulum. Like Manu sir said, that Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, the imagery used um, is full of paradoxes or opposites existing together. Just like, the pendulum would be oscillating between time and timelessness, between dreams and dreamlessness. So, yes, we are in that state of oscillating. When we find, references to one image, we find it subtly altered in another poem. Let me give you an example. I was just struck by this change. In the poem that we were talking about, the titular poem, A Rain of Rites, uh, the last two lines included a question: which still stale air sits on an angel's wings? So definitely the angel's wings would have been unused for some times. Otherwise, the air would not be stale, right? It is still stale air. But then in another poem, I think it is Four Rain Poems. Again, the title says Four Rain Poems, where it is stirred stale air. From still stale air, the transformation has happened, and now it is stirred stale air. So actually, these images, they converse with each other. There is a conversation going on between them. If you look at, if you read some poems, you will find that there is a movement happening through the language of those poems, and there is something that is being woven, something that is happening before your eyes, some change that you're witnessing while you are turning those pages. Yes, Manu sir, would you like to respond? And you said that Dawn at Puri, is a special poem for you. So, yes.
Well, I don't know if Dawn at Puri is special. I will come to that later, but maybe I was just caught where Vidyut was telling us about Sachidanandan, K. Sachidanandan, the poet. And I was uh, envisaging the meeting at the hotel lobby between Vidyut Bhushan Jena and Sachidanandan. Now, these are two people with three parts to their names, three interesting, you know, interesting incipits to their names: Vidyut Bhushan Jana and Satchidananda. So Satchidanandan would translate something like truth, consciousness, and bliss. And I guess both these names are very much evocative of the nature of poetry as well. And Vidyut was telling us about three poets. I would title our session as Three Poets and a Critic, because I know this, I guess this is the same Arunath that we have had in our research mentorship program as well. If he is this person, he is all philosophy, he is all criticism, and He's all sweetness and light as well. And so yeah, nice to have you here, Aruna. So delighted to see you, the the critic, who will make sure that we don't go out of our bounds with poetry and poetic explorations and appreciation. So I don't know if I am sure you would want to say a lot of things about the various things that were discussed. Vidyut was telling us about our existence being what was it? A brief crack of light between two eternities of darkness. And I don't know how Arunav's philosophic mind is processing that sort of a paradox, but I'm sure that you will have something interesting to share on that. And I would fully agree that our existence is a brief crack. And this crack, this idea of a crack, probably through which light or darkness can enter, reminds me of two poignant images in the two poems that we discussed. One, the poem I was talking to you about, Hunger. And there, the poet goes with, or the narrator goes with the fisherman to his hut. And he describes the way the door of the hut is opened. He says, in the flickering dark, his hut opened like a wound. His hut opened like a wound. The wind was high, and the days and nights before. I love this. Hut opened like a wound. And I guess this hut opening like a wound is symptomatic or onomatopic of the way our lips open when we are hungry. And the title of the poem, Hunger, and the two hungers we are talking about. And there is also a sexual way of looking at the hut, the body as the hut, and the hut opening like a wound. So I think here through we have a brief crack, a crevice through which light or darkness can enter. And the same with Dawn at Puri that you were reading, where um, you know two metaphors, I would say. First, in the first stanza where you spoke about a skull in the holy sands tilts its empty country towards hunger. Now I can visualize a skull with its mouth open, and he's saying its empty country, everything else is empty within the skull. So its empty country tilted towards hunger. Definitely, the poet must be imagining that the skull is hungry. And that is also, there are other points as well in that poem where you would want to look at the crevice. But I would just do a poetic gimmick here, and I would say Dawn at Puri can be read as Puri at dawn. And you are having Puri at dawn. You're eating puri at dawn. And think about it, there are endless metaphors or endless possibilities in that poem, Puri at dawn, if you look at it. Because Jayanta Mahapatra, the poet that he is, I'm sure that he must have had some naughty ideas also in titling that poem Dawn at Puri. It could as well be Puri at dawn. And then you read the poem, so retitle this poem Puri at dawn, and you read it, endless crow noises, definitely. A skull in the holy sand tilts its empty country towards hunger. Now, I know that I I risk turning this entire poem into something from pathetic to pathetic. Bathos looms large when I say that the skull tilts its empty country towards a puri that our narrator is having at dawn. And then you are saying white clad widowed women past the centers of their lives are waiting to enter the great temple. Now, I'm sure that you have umpteen different interpretations crossing your mind, not the least the biblical idea that the body is a temple, is the God's temple. So I don't know, but the Puri is going to enter the temple, and its crevice is open. They're austerize, and you know, if you take that strand further, you can find meanings for caught in a net. You know, the Puri caught in a net, and then you know, that fills my aging mother, fills my aging mother. You know, there is some reference to the aging mother. Fills, I'm sure it is about the solitary pyre, but I am also thinking about the fire, uh, which you know, prepared this puri, the solitary pyre that fills my aging mother. So my aging mother is fed on the puri at dawn, and I think so. I mean, this crevice opens a world of possibilities, and if it is not the fish slithering, it is the puri struggling between our teeth that this poem speaks about. And sorry for you know, pulling that poem down from its uh, sublime heights to pathetic lows. But yeah, that's it. And I don't know if I would definitely love to listen to your take on all these things. Definitely, you will have a lot to say.
Definitely, Manu sir. I have already asked him to respond to whatever is going on here. He's going to do that. And it's interesting, the way you brought in food imagery into this poem. You turned it upside down, or rather, I would say, you just the inward things became outward, and outward things became inward. You did something to the poem here. But that is what we mean by amalgamation, what we understand by the word amalgamation. Uh, See, this collection is titled A Rain of Rites. And just as, those widows, they are actually part of this rite that is imposed on them, that they have to fast for a particular period of time. They have to be austere, and they have to then go and visit the lords in the great temple, the Jagannath temple at Puri. But the way you brought in the image of Puri, the food, I mean, if we just think about the circular shape, then it has something to do with their hollow eyes. And the way they stare has that hollowness, and the way there is hollowness inside a puri. I mean, it swells up, but then there is hollowness inside a puri. And they seem to be caught in a net, just like you see the puri being, taken out of the hot oil with the help of some kind of netted device. I don't know what to call it. I mean, in English, suddenly there's no word for that, but you understand what I'm trying to say. So yes, that's what Vidyut was also saying, that there cannot be just one or two or three or four ways of looking at a poem. There have to be steel sieved. Yeah, thank you. So it also, that sieve also looks like a net that they are caught in. And the word rights is important, because we are also talking about habits here. Just as observing those rites become a habit for the widows, they have to visit the lords. That also becomes a habit. So there is some kind of hollowness there. Even in their performing these rites, there is a kind of hollowness. And that hollowness uh, you know um, is equal to the hollowness within a skull, that is equal to the hollowness within their eyes, and that is equal to the hollowness in the pyre, solitary pyre. But as you said, the pyre, we are habituated to think about, whenever we see the word pyre, we think it is a funeral pyre. But as you just said, it could very well be the fire which makes the puri possible. And that just gives a very different feel to the whole poem. And I'm really interested to know what Vidyut has to say about this, and then we will go to Aruna. Yes, Vidyut sir.
Um, I really loved listening to both of you, and how, uh, as Manu sir said, how he, almost turned it upside down. But that is how it has to be, actually. Why not? In the if poetry is open to interpretation, and it's also open to experiences. In fact, I'm forgetting the name of the Bengali poet. Sukanta Bhattacharya, somebody, I'm forgetting the name, where he's a slightly left-leaning poet, and he says that you are maybe privileged when you look at the moon. The moon looks like the face of your beloved, but whenever I look at the moon, it looks like roti to me, chapati to me, because I'm hungry. So that way also we can interpret, that is one. But this I somehow would like to read these two poems, Hunger and Dawn at Puri, as one poem. There is this language of hunger, and in Jayanta Mahapatra, the absence really encapsulates the poem quite, captures the poem from beginning to end, that absence of it. And if our imagination runs wild, just imagine if you look at somebody and imaginatively remove all the skin, are you not seeing a skeleton, a skull, really? Okay. I have personally used the image of skull. I remember in one of my poems that, the skull preserving the residue of the last year's rain and the moss in it. That also image I had used. I remember reading a poem by Lorca called the City That Never Sleeps. I think in that poem also Lorca talks about an entire hungry countryside on the thighs of the corpse that has been buried. Okay. And I don't think any political propaganda can do this, what poetry can do. I think that is one of the reasons why I think it was Matthew Arnold who said, the future of poetry is immense. And this I when read these images haunt you throughout, wherever you go, they just haunt you, those images. And look at the language also. I don't have the poems ready in front of me, but look at the language, if I remember correctly, that, tilting the countryside. Look at the language. you know Now somebody who is quite factual would say that, okay, how is it possible? It's very much like, I asked my students, we read Leaves of Grass. So do you think, there's a student said, sir, don't you think there's a grammatical error? It should be blades of grass. No, I said, this is the problem. When it's you know in the language of poetry. And now why leaves of grass? Maybe for all William, Walt Whitman is talking about the leaves of the pages of his book, maybe, and grass could be this, the symbol of humility, for that matter. Okay. And when I look at this poem of Jayanta Mahapatra, that as beautiful as Manusa spoke about that hut, that example, that hut could be a wound that opens. And also when Manu sir was talking about it, I was reminded of Jalaluddin Rumi. In the it is through the wound that light enters, and that is one. And how that also can be compared to of that it can have, in a way, sexual imagery also. It can be used like that. And also this emptiness in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry that I encounter whenever I read, even his Odia poems also. This particular collection has both Odia and English, and I think the translation could have been a bit better. more, but maybe they were, there was a paucity of time because of which they were trying to bring it out. It's a collection. So this silence also in his Odia poetry, and this emptiness, and this uh, um, which I think we ask this question, right? Art for art's sake or art for life? That, and I think where Miss Arundhati Roy in her second book has failed, Jayanta Mahapatra's poems have succeeded. It's not like activism without, because poetry also uses a certain kind of language. It may have a sense. It is also a craft at a certain level. And throughout this poem, Dawn at Puri, I see that, you know, these images, um, half tones, and very, very, I would say, Proustian also at a certain level. We read the series of novels of Marcel Proust, uh, how nothing goes untouched. It's uh, um, the unification of experience that we see. Yeah, I'll stop there because I'm somehow struggling with what I was trying to say. And yeah.
Yes, nothing is left untouched. And I feel, the way the poems connect the theme of hunger, even hunger becomes a right for some, at least.
Yeah,
Even
it's a
hunger,
season,
yeah,
almost like a season,
it
right?
is a right. Just like, we just bear rain sometimes and without paying attention to it. So sometimes hunger is born without paying attention to it. So, yes, we should
Oh,
just
yeah, if
continue.
you don't mind, just one sentence I would
Yes,
use.
yes, please.
There's another poem by Aga Shahid Ali called "Snow in the Desert." That is also, this uses different time zones, like New York bringing uh, together. Suddenly it shifts and comes back to Delhi. Then suddenly through these lines you have this, uh, you know, the magical voice of Begum Akhtar being inaugurated. So I'll stop there. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Arun, now it's your turn. Please, just whatever you have to say, please share it with us and with the audience, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
I don't think I am qualified enough to actually contribute. I don't think that I'm qualified enough to contribute. But since all of you have mentioned that you are poets and we're talking about poetry, anything and everything goes, I guess. So, um, Bidut sir, what you when you were talking about memory, and in the very first poem that we discussed, the Rain of Rites. Uh, when I went through the poem, I really had no sense. The idea of memory and nostalgia was there, but when I was listening to you and to Shatruma ma'am, what I got was a neutral or maybe a positive feeling. But when I actually went through the poem, all I could see was negativity. I'm not sure if that's something wrong in me, or I don't know why that is. Because let me just point out a few things here. When he talks about rain coming in, it's not really a celebration. It's something that darkens the sky. It breaks into the light. The light is taken away, and then we come across trading and thrown like kelp, thrown, something which is discarded perhaps. Then we have malignant purpose in a nun's eye. I'm not exactly sure if there are some other connotations there, why nun's eye and why malignant. But these things and the idea of blood on someone's face, maybe it could be something, the blood rushing to our faces when we're happy perhaps, or it might be actual blood, maybe from an injury or something, I'm not sure. But throughout the poem, what I'm getting is feeling of trauma associated in some way with rain. And when the rain comes in, the person goes through a particular phase where he's reminded of everything, and everything comes rushing to him, and then that person questions, okay, why is this happening? And the whole sort of that whole train of thought. And then the sometimes we feel like the answer is right there, but we don't know what it is. We can't, we are not able to reach it. And unlike what I personally believe, that meaning can be anything, it depends on the reader and the kind of interplay the reader has with the text. But if we look at the fourth stanza as a continuation of the third, in the third, he mentions, numbly I climb to the mountain tops of ours, where my own soul quivers on the edge of answers. And then, which still stale air sits on angels' wings. If it is stale, is can we look at it as something which is collectively fixed? It's not being changed. It's there. The answers are perhaps there, or meaning is perhaps there. And when we are saying that meaning can be, it's open to interpretation, maybe there's this idea that some things in certain things it's not really as open as we'd like to think. And the last part, especially, what holds my reign so it's hard to overcome it. For me, I'm just reading it as someone who's perhaps trying to get out of a very bad mental state, someone who is trying hard to climb out, but he's not being able to. And doesn't really read that well. All the positive vibes I was getting when, ma'am, you were reading it, and when Bidut sir was elaborating, I agree. All of that, 100%. The idea of memory and everything, I totally agree with it. But the way it reads, it gives a totally different feeling altogether. And especially this mention of the last man on earth. Who was the last man on earth to whom the cold cloud brought the drop to his brought the blood to his face? Or is it perhaps a reference to the fact, the idea that rain cannot possibly be associated with, can it, the kind of questioning, can it be associated with happy things? Who was the last person who was actually happy to feel the coldness, the cold rain, the cold cloud, whatever the cloud brought? Is it something good? When we are happy, we have blood rushing to our faces, we are having fun and everything. Maybe there is this angle of someone being shy. I'm not sure. But this idea, or could it be actual blood, maybe from some injury, a blood representative of injury, physical, something maybe psychological? I don't know, but just what I got from reading the text. And I'd like to say that when Sir mentioned I am a critic, and all of you, Satruma ma'am, Manu sir, and Bidit sir, you are all poets. I don't think so, because then Manu sir continued to critique whatever he had said before, uh, and the eloquent way he has, of speaking. And I'm not really there yet, I think. But this particular poem, especially, um, I'm not sure how to develop. I guess that's it for now. I'm still trying to internalize it. As for the other poems, relating to hunger, uh, I've just read them, and I'm not sure how I'll be able to contribute, because all of the things that came to my mind, Bidut sir, Manu sir, and Shatrupam, and we have already talked about that in detail. So I guess I'll just stick to listening more for.
Thank you, Arunab. That was interesting because if you remember, I began the session with that question: what is it about rain that makes the poet say that he wants to overcome it? So it is not something positive, obviously, because you see, that is what I was trying to hint at when I said that why does he use the image of kelp, which is, if we look at it one way, yes, it is useful, but otherwise it is just seaweed which gets thrown on the seashore. So it's something that he wants to escape but cannot, and that is how this theme of rights gets connected with the theme of rain. So rights are also painful or traumatic for some people, but they are not able to escape the hold of those rights. So in the same way, rain has acquired that kind of connotation, not a happy one, as you say, but that kind of a painful, resonance for the poet, which is why he's talking about the last man on earth for whom, this cloud or the, resultant rain was exciting. If we take blood rushing to the face as the meaning of that expression. So there is a last man on earth. That means after that man, nobody has found rain exciting. Or the poet at least thinks that. So here I feel, because this is a titular poem, and all these poems that are included in this collection, they are somehow about rights. Some poems are about rain explicitly, but some other poems, they focus only on rights. And that is why the coming together of these two words, rain and rights, it gives me the feeling of some compulsions that we would like to transcend, but we are not able to transcend. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for reading the poem while we were talking about it, because it is important to actually feel the words, read the words and feel the words, because as we all know, there are as many readings as there are people in a room or people in a class. So thank you, Aruna, for reading the poems while we were talking about it. Yes. So Manu sir and Vidyut sir, if you'd like to say something, please go ahead. Then we will wind up this session. Thank you, Aruna.
I think I would agree perfectly with what Aruna had to say about that particular poem, that it leaves a stain in the mind rather than leaving something bright. I think in many places in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry, it's about a rain that leaves a stain, a rain that causes pain, a rain that results in a bane, a rain that obscures the brain. This is how it works in Jayanta Mahapatra. And the last man on earth, I believe, is somebody who lived before the poet wrote this poem, which means that was when rain was sweet and delightful and bountiful. The poet writes this poem when rain has already ceased to be that and has started to be something, like what T.S. Eliot would speak about in his wasteland. Wasteland. I think it is a rain that is a bane to a wasteland that the poet is speaking about in this poem. You know, it cannot be that the rain is bad. It is a transferred epithet. If there is some negativity attached to the rain, then it must necessarily be because of where it is falling, when it is falling, because I think the timing of the rain is very important. If a cricket team is losing a match and if the rain falls for them it is a good rain. When the children are out there playing and if it rains, it's a bad rain. Um, you know, I have heard religious preachers saying something similar about the rain. When it starts to rain, they will pray, oh God, may this rain go away so that people can listen to this sermon, really listen to this preaching without any hindrance. And when it rains, cats and dogs, they suddenly change the tone and they say, it's the rain of blessing that is falling. And they add, thanks to this rain, people who were outside the temple have also come inside because of the rain. And that means it's a blessing because they too can hear the words of the preacher. I think rain is innocent. It's the reader, it's the critic, it's us who make the rain whatever it is. So if the rain is a stain or a pain, uh, who is responsible? It's not the last man, it's not the poet, but it's only us. As Simon would say in Golding's Lord of the Flies, I think the beastie is only us. It's only us. And probably Jayanta Mahapatra wanted to speak about such an apocalyptic vision as well. Thank you.
Yes, Manu sir. And actually, Arnav got this impression about the positive uh, bearings of rain. Because in the beginning of the session, I was talking about Risha Shringa and how, he brought rain onto a land that was facing drought for many years. Just because his celibacy was compromised because when the king sent courtesans to him and he yielded to the courtesans, and that was how he was able to perform this sacrifice. But I would just like to continue from there. Suppose Rishashringa was reflecting on what happened. At that time, he was not aware of what was happening. And everyone said that it was for the good. It brought rain onto that land and saved the people. But what about his years of penance, his years of celibacy, which was compromised in just one moment when the courtesans were sent to him? What if he was revisiting the same memory many years later and he cannot, forgive himself for letting go of all his years of penance in just a moment of time, and he is not heeding his father's warnings in this moments of weakness where he submitted to the call of the courtesans. So what if it is traumatic for him to just think about this thing that happened so many years ago? It was given the garb of a good omen that brought rain to rainless land. But then what about his own penance and the way it was compromised? Suppose Rishi Shringa would be reflecting on this. Would it cause him pain that all his years of penance were wasted? So it's
And
not.
the pain of Vaishali.
So it's not as if even the myth stops there or the story stops there, and that is what Vidyut sir was also trying to say, that the poem seems as if it is a continuation of something and as if it will continue into something else. So it was really nice, listening to everyone and everyone's thoughts coming together. And I think if unless someone wants to say anything else, we would wind up today. Yes,
Only one thing I would say, I think Arunav is a positive person. Very positive. He has taken only positive things from our early deliberation. No, I was also talking about absence. How, I remember I was saying that stretching your hand across 35 years of absence. In the same way, I think Manu sir, when we were talking about rain, why is it that the wasteland at a certain level can be interpreted as a painful poem, because the denizens of wasteland are not able to participate in the beauty of rain in the first place also. Okay, so that's why because a poem shows, since a poem shows, it's outside the bounds of this binary of either positive or negative. It just shows. And the same rain. Okay, just imagine the rain you are enjoying from your balcony uh, of a posh locality. That's why I spoke about the moon. Moon looking like somebody's face and moon looking like chapati. So just imagine, you are looking at the sky and as though you know it's you feel as the sky has been perforated. It's a perforated sky. Somebody has created holes in the sky, and the rain through falling through your thatched roof into your house and deluging the parenthesis of all your dreams. So that can also be looked upon as. So we are talking about both positive and negative, but something Arun said is very important. uh, I think Arunav also spoke about interpretation, and while hinting at interpretation, Arunav said that poetry can also have a definite meaning, right? Arunav, if I'm not wrong, it can also have a definite meaning. Now, poetry can have a definite meaning, but that definite meaning the reader would never know, and no reading of autobiography would evince that information. That is one way of looking at the second thing. Yes, the poetry can have a definite meaning. I remember reading The Wasteland, and there is a line in The Wasteland that, speak to me, my nerves are bad tonight, speak to me. Now, if you are looking for a non-definite meaning, Arunav, it could be, okay, speak to me. It can be, you can completely, there is something called um, uh, that what is that, intentional fallacy, and the other one is, I'm forgetting, uh, where the poet uses the we take the intent of the
Affectional
writer.
fallacy.
Affective
Affection.
fallacy, affective and intentional fallacy. Now the point is, if we try understanding T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, that's this particular line, speak to me, my nerves are bad tonight. There is a reference to it. If you read Peter Ackroyd's biography of T.S. Eliot, you would know that he's actually maybe talking about his wife, whose pastime was to pounce on him and scratch his face, because his wife was neurotic. Now, this could be a definite meaning, but what is the guarantee that she was talking about the wife, really? Is that, can we really guarantee that it is the wife that he was talking about? So that means when a reader reads a poem, the poem is completely stripped off its original context at a certain level. So there is no dismissing the fact that the poet may have looked at a definite meaning. But is it not always a journey in poetry from the particular to the universal, from the individual to the collective? So I think it works both ways. I think Manu sir also summed it up beautifully when you're talking about the rain. The rain maybe is non-binary, let me use that word, and the rain is neutral at a certain level. And we associate, maybe we invest the rain with human attributes. So thus the rain becomes either painful or pleasurable. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
May I just add something?
sure, sure.
Uh, I kind of missed the other connotations when Vidyut sir and Shatrupa ma'am were speaking. I think mostly because I was fixated on this thing. I was really focusing on these things, and whatever Vidyut sir said, it kind of lined up, and I was like, okay, this sounds a little different, and maybe I didn't grasp that completely. That was my fault, and thank you for pointing it out. And sir, what I said about meaning, I was not referring to it meaning that any work of art. I was pointing out that the idea in that particular poem, where the poet is talking about finding answers, and he mentions that it's stale. The idea of stale is connected to answers. So I questioned if it could be of meanings to a particular thing said, as if it's limited, but an interpretation. But yes.
Thank you, Arunav.
So now we have come to the end of this beautiful session on Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry. And we began with the poem A Rain of Rites, where there is the phrase where my soul quivers on the edge of answers. And that, I believe, would be the experience of anyone who would read Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry. And I would like to end with just 3 lines from another of his poems, 4 rain poems. So just 3 lines, because we have been talking about rain and memory and suggestiveness and absences. So I think these 3 lines would sum up everything that we have been trying to discuss. Drifting across old scars like a walk in a familiar country, simply celebrates the abyss of voiceless rain, justifies nothing. Thank you. Thank you for being here, Manu sir, Vidyut sir, and Arunav. Thank you for making this session memorable and wonderful. Good night.
Thank you for initiating such sharing of ideas. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, Manu sir. Namaste, Arunav, everyone.
Bye. Good night.
Namaste, sir. Good night.